Hello world, welcome back to the Saw Retrospective. Today we will be discussing Saw 6. I remember actually liking this movie and being pleasantly surprised by the quality of it, especially after the horrendous disaster that was Saws 4 and 5. I liked it a bit less this time around. There were still good things and it's definitely a huge jump in quality, but I don't know. It's it's going to be a little bit lower in my ranking this time around. But anyway, let's dive in. So, in terms of the plot and story, the there's two main storylines running in parallel this time around. We have Detective Hoffman and his investigative work with the FBI, particularly Special Agent Erickson, and Perez, who is back from the dead after being. Her death was faked in Saw 5 because Erickson didn't know who to trust, and apparently now finds Hoffman trustworthy after Hoffman has successfully framed Special Agent Strom as being Jigsaw's accomplice. So we have that. And then on the other side of things, we have a trial of William Easton, who is senior vice president at an insurance company. I think Umbrella Insurance was the name of it. Um, I watched this movie yesterday instead of immediately before doing this video, so it's maybe a little bit of disjointedness there. I like to do these videos immediately after, but there's only so much I can do when I record a 53-minute video that practically fills up my hard drive, and I need to wait for it to finish uploading before I can make a new one. Anyway, where was I? So yeah, William Easton, he goes through a series of traps in order to test himself, similar to what happened with Jeff in Saw 3. Um, and I did enjoy Saw 3, so maybe I just like this kind of format of traps. Generally speaking, or at least thus so far in the series, there have been three kind of trap formats. We have the original Saw, where it's just people stuck in traps, each person has their own thing. Um, we have one person being, or yeah, sorry, person in their own trap. We have a bunch of people going through a series of traps. We had this in Saw 2 and Saw 5. And then we have one person being led through a bunch of traps, which they may or may not directly be part of. And we've seen this in Saws 3, 4, and 6. Where yeah, someone else is in the direct path of danger, and it is the person whose trial it is. It's their job to save these people, or with the exception of Saw 4, where it was Riggs' um, job to not save people. Saw 4 doesn't make a lot of sense. Anyway, we're talking about Saw 6 now. So let's focus. Let's talk about Hoffman first. So before I dive into this, while watching this, I came to a realization of why I don't really care for Hoffman's storyline at all for the most part. And it's because of the lack of a sense of mystery. Like for example, in the original Saw movie, but back when it was more of a police procedural than just a straight up horror movie, we had there was a sense of mystery. We were along with the people in the movie. The audience was trying to figure out what was going on. Just you get little bits and pieces as you gain more information. However, with Hoffman's storyline, there's not really any mystery. We know that Hoffman is the one doing things. There's not much for the audience to really learn. We get some stuff fleshed out in flashbacks, but for the most part, we know everything that's going on. It's just a matter of we're watching Hoffman try not to get caught as the FBI is still investigating things and kind of closing in around him. And Hoffman isn't interesting enough of a character to me to really get invested in this. I mean, sometimes you can like follow along with a killer and it'll be interesting. Take for example the TV show Dexter. The protagonist of that one is a serial killer, and well, I mean, aside the fact that there's still another mystery going on, we're following this person along, and it's just a much more interesting character. So we're more invested in that story. With Hoffman's storyline, it's you can't say the same. It's it's definitely a big negative thing for Saws 4 through 7. Um, but anyway, let's go diving into stuff. So the film opens. Hoffman gets out of his box because he was previously saved while Strom was crushed to death by walls. Strom is now mangled beyond recognition. And then he gets called in by the FBI, who has taken over the whole Jigsaw case thing after it seems like it's still going. Although now Strom is being framed for it instead of Hoffman, who actually did it. And at this point, we learn that, yeah, Special Agent Perez is actually alive. Hoffman's taken a bit aback by this and is angry about it, which comes off as a little bit odd. I mean, with the exception of the fact that he tried to kill Perez, you'd think that most people would be like grateful that someone else is alive, especially since he kind of faked some condolences in Saw 5 when talking to Strom. But yeah, it's a little bit of an odd moment where he's unnecessarily hostile. But they agree to work together, and with that from the FBI's side, it's going to be all secrets shared, nothing held back. Although obviously Hoffman is not going to be doing the same thing because he's not going to just come out and admit, "Hey, I'm the one who did these traps." And again, it's what I said earlier, where is it's just not interesting to watch because nothing is being withheld from the audience. We know what's going on. It's just a matter of, okay, when are they going to find out? Yep, just keep going. Okay, this clue has been left behind. We knew about that. So in specific, the FBI is closing in just because Hoffman he's not as good as John Kramer was. He messes up a little bit, and in this case specifically, um, we had a trap at the beginning of the film that I'll go into more detail with the pound of flesh trap, where Hoffman cut out a jigsaw piece from someone's skin, but he used a serrated knife instead of the surgical quality knife that John Kramer used because John is very careful and meticulous about this. Whereas in some ways, well, not in some ways, in a lot of ways, Hoffman is just a pale imitation. And this is, yeah, we really get to see that this time around. We saw that a little bit back in Saw 5, where John criticized the quality of the pendulum blade that Hoffman had used when killing Seth Baxter because it wasn't made of tempered steel and therefore wouldn't last very long, which seems a little bit pedantic just because you're not. I wouldn't expect these traps to really be reused. Like you wouldn't need the blade to last super long, but it says more about just the characters of John and Hoffman. Just yeah, John is really caring about the work. Hoffman is just I'm just going to get this work done. I don't really care about the quality of it. It just needs to get done. I'm going to blame someone else for it. So yeah, he doesn't care. So there's the serrated blade, and as it turns out that a serrated blade was only used in one other jigsaw case, and the reason we know that is because apparently the same coroner has worked on all of these cases, and we just never met them until John Kramer's autopsy at the beginning of Saw 4. I don't know, it seems a little coincidental to me. I'm willing to believe it just because we didn't see any coroner related stuff in the first three, so there's nothing to really contradict it. But yeah, so with Seth Baxter being the only other one where a serrated blade is used, the FBI are now going back and trying to listen to the Seth Baxter tape in case a different voice other than John Kramer's was used, which, as it turns out, is correct. Um, so we have I think I actually skipped over this, but we have a scene where Hoffman goes to the hospital to see the person who survived the opening trap. And they talk about, okay, Jigsaw did this, and they were terrible people, and we're supposed to learn a lesson. And Hoffman asks the odd question of, did you? Did you learn a lesson from this? Which I don't know. It's a bit antagonistic from a police officer. Obviously, we know it's because he's an apprentice of John Kramer, but that seems almost like a slip up. That doesn't. I feel like he shouldn't have gone down that route because it does kind of box him in as, hey, you might have something to do with this. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. But yeah, the person starts screaming, saying, "Hey, look at my arm," because she had to cut it off. What am I supposed to learn from this? Which does really put a lot of these traps into question. In that, obviously, John thinks that you face people with death, and if they make it out alive, they are going to be a different person. Sometimes this is a case. So Amanda is, for the most part, a different person after her experience with the reverse bear trap. But that's not going to happen with everyone. And in this case, we have a situation where it's a little bit unclear what lesson someone is supposed to learn from having to cut their arm off. It makes you think almost like what was the benefit of Dr. Gordon cutting his foot off in the original Saw movie? It's little details like this I like because it shows that John Kramer's whole plan is a bit flawed. I mean, he fully believes in it, but the rest of the world might not, which is it's an interesting little cog thrown into things just because of how interesting John Kramer's whole philosophy is. But yeah, so it gives you some things to think about. Um, Tying into Hoffman's or running alongside Hoffman's storyline, we have a little bit of stuff going on with Jill Tuck, who was married to John Kramer. She got a box during Saw 4, and now, no, sorry, not 4, 5. They're blurring together at this point. This is what happens when you watch so many movies of the same series back to back. Um, but yeah, so inside this box is 6 envelopes. Apparently, these are things for another series of traps. And she gives them to Hoffman, who decides, okay, I'm going to be running the shots now. But she only gives him 5 of them. So, more on that later. Um, yeah, so I'm going through my notes again. So, more FBI investigation stuff. We learn we have a because it's Saw. We always have a series of flashbacks. So in terms of the flashbacks from Hoffman's side, we have we have one of sorry, think of my we have a flashback of Hoffman helping to set up the rack trap from Saw 3. There's a little bit of discussion about the fact that, Hoffman isn't necessarily in this to save people. He's more in it just for the brutality of it. Timothy Young, the victim of the specific trap, is unconscious, and Hoffman just unceremoniously tosses him onto the floor, which John doesn't agree with. He finds this distasteful. This Hoffman is not about trying to save people. He just wants to watch people suffer, which, yeah, John doesn't agree with. I mean, he has a twisted sense of morality, but it's not corrupted to the point of where he just wants to see people torn apart. Hoffman does. It's a really big difference between them. And I think in this way, Hoffman aligns a little bit more with Amanda Young and her tendency to create traps that are not winnable. They both are completely failing at understanding John Kramer's philosophy of he is doing these things in order to not just test people, but to try to save them, to try to put people's lives back on track, although through incredibly violent and twisted methods. So, like, in a way, his end goal is a good thing, but it's very difficult to justify the paths that he takes to get there. And yeah, Hoffman has he has a different goal in mind with all this. Although the most interesting part of this flashback is that we actually see Jill there on that day, which is news because we knew that Jill actually she wasn't on board with the things John was doing, which actually really complicates things. Which because depending on the movie or the scene or the flashback, sometimes she's fine with the things John is doing, sometimes she's not. It's actually incredibly unclear as to where Jill stands on this whole thing. I mean, we've known in the past that she hasn't liked what John has been doing, and that's why John kind of kicked her out of his life. But then there are moments in this movie where she's just perfectly fine with going along with John's plans and machinations. So it's what was in my mouth? Yeah, it's very unclear what she thinks of all this. Which, yeah, I don't know what to think of her character in whole, just because of how wildly inconsistent it is. Maybe there is reasoning behind it, and I just haven't been able to find it. I don't know. Um, so the other big flashback we have with Hoffman is that um, actually I'll talk about that later. Sorry. So yeah, this goes along. Hoffman is still being uh, hunted by the FBI that he's working with, and we find out that the FBI has decoded or deciphered. I'm not sure what the term is. That they're able to figure out what the voice is on the Seth Baxter tape. So the FBI special agents are called into like the I don't know the forensics room to go over this, which begs two questions. One, why couldn't they have just been told information over the phone? Besides the fact that the movie is trying to set up for a dramatic reveal. And two, why were they called in at this point? Because once they get there, that the technician is still working on getting the tape completely decoded. So this is more of a call of, hey, I'm almost done doing things without exactly knowing how close they were to being done. It's a little, the timing of this part is weird. But anyway, Hoffman is obviously nervous because of he knows what's on the tape, and when the tape is finally, or yeah, he knows what's on the tape, and then we can we're seeing that Perez and Erickson don't fully believe that Strom was responsible for all this stuff. And as we find out, it's because the fingerprints that Strom left behind indicate that he was already dead. And then we get a flashback showing that Hoffman did this by taking Strom's hand, which somehow survived the wall crushing trap just incredibly easily, which means I guess the walls didn't go all the way up to the ceiling or something. It's a bit weird how a hand was able to survive that in such good condition. But yeah, Hoffman has been going around just taking this disembodied hand and just placing it on various things in order to leave um, Strom's fingerprints there, and yeah, the FBI isn't buying it. And then at that moment, the tape is fully decoded, and we can hear clear as day that this is Hoffman's voice on the tape. So he's been caught, and he just goes on a killing spree, which is something that, I don't know, seems a little bit out of character for him. I mean, I know he's been like using the whole jigsaw idea to hide up on or to like disguise his murderous activities, but here he just goes at it. He um, slices Erickson's throat. He uses the technician as a human shield, and then repeatedly stabs Perez in the torso with a knife. This, yeah, it's actually surprisingly brutal from him, or it's surprisingly brutal for the scene. I guess it's not really brutal for him because of what he did to Seth Baxter. But anyway, um, And then there's a weird moment where Hoffman continues to try to blame all this on Strom and put more fingerprints on the scene because apparently, even though the FBI was able to figure out the first time that these shouldn't be accurate fingerprints, it'll work fine the second time. I don't know why he assumes that. And then he just burns everything down. Um, so yeah, cut to Jill doing stuff with the six envelope. And as we see that Jill had early in the film been given a letter that was found at the scene of John's death, and we find so back in Saw 3, John told Amanda that there was a letter in a drawer for her, and we don't actually get to find out what was on that letter. Should have been something that John wrote, but Hoffman replaced it with something that Hoffman himself wrote, revealing that Hoffman knew that when uh, Cecil broke into the clinic and inadvertently killed John's unborn child, Amanda was actually there that day with Cecil, kind of egging him on. So Amanda is in some ways responsible for the death of John's child, which sent him down this entire path. Um, and Hoffman threatens to tell John unless Amanda kills uh, Lynn back in Saw 3, knowing full well that doing that will result in Amanda's death and her failing her test. And I really despise this. This is one of those like, oh, it's a revealed thing that, yeah, it just directly contradicts earlier things. I mean, I liked at the end of Saw 3 where we're really seeing what Amanda's state of mind is and how she views all this, and that she is so far gone or not really saved that she is just perfectly willing to kill Lynn partially out of like jealousy. That John was kind of like pushing her towards a little bit in order to test her. And just revealing that she did that just because she was being blackmailed, it just really takes away from this character moment. It really just completely devalues the end of Amanda's arc. And yeah, I really do not like that change. There's some of these flashbacks which, so generally speaking, the flashbacks in the last four movies fall into three categories. There's ones that reveal new information that is interesting. There is ones that really don't add much to the story. And then there's ones which add stuff that actively takes away from what we previously had. And this is definitely one of those moments in the latter category. And yeah, I just don't like that. Um, so yeah, but after that, Jill uh, electrifies Hoffman, puts him in a chair, and gives him his very own test, which is another reverse bear trap. The signature trap of the series makes another appearance, so it's cool to see that again. Um, but in the end of the day, Hoffman does have this will to live, and he survives to fight another day. Although obviously at this point he's kind of deranged, just because yeah, he's gone. Um, he has lost it. Just checking the time here. So now switching gears to William Easton's plotline. So before all the traps, we have some moments um, being introduced to William in his insurance office, and it's not a nice place. He's being prepared for a deposition because he's being sued by the family of Harold Arnold, who was someone whose insurance plan was rejected and dropped and died as a result because they couldn't afford to cover treatment. Um, and we also meet the Dog Pit, who is this group of people whose job it is specifically to find errors and discrepancies to give the company an excuse to drop people from coverage so that they can save money, just even though it doesn't save lives. So yeah, William is not a very good person. Um, so eventually Yeah, I'm skipping forward. We also learn some stuff through a series of flashbacks that William had interactions with John Kramer in the past, and actually, John used this as an insurance company. So we find out that William helped organize a party at the clinic. John and William meet, and we begin to see the differencing of their ideals, which this is a pretty interesting part. So William has devised this formula, like this mathematical formula based on like a person's current health, their likelihood of sickness, and how long they're going to live based on like their medical history and things like that. Essentially, boiling people down to a series of numbers on whether or not to cover this person based on whether it's going to make the company lose money or not. And John disagrees with this because it's not taking into effect what he calls the most essential part, which is the human will to live. And this, I will say, as much as I dislike all the Hoffman stuff, I do like this half of the movie, just because it's very interesting to see just this twisted look at how messed up the American healthcare system is, and how easy it is for people to just be boiled down to a series of numbers, without taking into account the actual person. I mean, there could be someone out there who has essentially like the exact same um, health as I do, but we wouldn't be equal just on the grounds that one of us may have a stronger will to survive. They may be able to fight more for it, but just from a mathematical perspective, we would be treated as exactly equal, and John really doesn't like that. Um, so then later we see John come into William's office to try to convince him to get an experimental cancer treatment covered. And William says no because this treatment it's not deemed successful enough, so it's not going to be covered. And then goes and says that if John seeks this treatment, he'll be dropped from coverage by the company, which sounds incredibly cruel. And actually, according to the IMDb trivia, is actually not something that they can legally do, but it's used as a plot point anyway. So take that for what it is. Um, and yeah, John just begins to criticize him for just treating people so, I don't want to say informally, just so impersonally. And we actually get some great moments from Tobin Bell here, where William says something and John just replies like, "Oh, that came off your tongue incredibly smooth. It was practically slick. These are just words that he's practiced so well, and he has such an impersonal touch to this that it's just John finds it repulsive." And then there's this really weird moment where John says piranha in just this very odd tone of voice that seems just at odd. Just it's very it just seems apart from the entire rest of the scene. It is, which is a weird acting choice, but it is interesting partially because it seems like he's calling William a piranha, as in he's just preying on the weak and stripping their flesh away. This analogy got away from me, and also because there's just actual piranha in a fish tank in William's office. So that's interesting. So yeah, I think those are the two main flashbacks. William goes through his trials, and I'm going to. We also see flashes to two groups of people. One of which is a mother and son in this caged area with a vat of hydrochloric acid or hydrofluoric acid. Sorry, HF, I believe was what it said. Just incredibly corrosive material, and a lever on a box that says "live" and "die," and I guess they have to make their choice. Throughout the film, the mother doesn't want to pull this because she doesn't know what it's going to do, whereas the son definitely wants to pull it because he wants to live. Although when it does actually pull it, nothing happens because the lever isn't primed until a very specific point in the movie. And then we also see Pamela Jenkins, who is a reporter who has been sensationalizing the life of John Kramer essentially in order to further her own career. And from here, I'm actually going to move on to discussing the twist in this movie, which it's actually a pretty minor twist. It's not a bad one, it just doesn't have. Oh, wait, actually, sorry. Before I go on to that, so I mentioned that I didn't like the Hoffman's whole storyline, but I did like Williams' whole storyline. I will say it is a negative bit that they are just so disjointed. You can separate the two halves of this movie, and you can do that very easily. They're not real, except for a couple of shots. Well, except for knowing that Hoffman was the one who kidnapped these people and put them into this situation at John's request, and occasionally you see him just watching the test going on. You can separate these two halves of the movie very easily. They are not connected at all. Um, I much prefer it when the things are connected, such as back in Saw 2, when we have the nerve gas house, which has Detective Matthews' son in it, and then we have Detective Matthews himself, who is going through his stuff, and also watching this happen to his son. So there's the connection there. I think uh, I also complained about this back in Saw 5, where, yeah, the series of traps that are going on have pretty much nothing to do with the entire rest of the movie. It's just, you just have two almost different movies that are kind of shoved together in order to make up a full hour and a half running time. And I don't find that that works as well. I like it better when it's more cohesive. But anyway, moving on to the twist. So the small twist here is we've been led, or all along, William has been told that he needs to get through these tests. Well, for two reasons. One is he has some shackles on his limbs that will explode after an hour, and two, he needs to do this just for some extra motivation because otherwise he won't ever see his family again. And every time that has been mentioned, we almost immediately cut to a shot of the uh, mother and son. So we're led to believe that this is his family, but this is in fact not true. And his family is actually Pamela Jenkins is William Easton's sister. So they're the only family each other has, and the mother and son are actually related to Harold Arnold, who was the person who died, and as a result, they're suing him. So they weren't the people he was trying to get to, and in fact, there's this extra trial um, where they are in charge of whether or not William lives or dies at the end. And William claims that, oh, this wasn't my test, which is actually not a correct assumption. He was being tested through everything. This is just an additional test on top of things. Um, I don't know. I kind of like it. It's a good. It shows that the misdirection was good, but ultimately it doesn't really add much to the movie. Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was neat, but if you take out the twist, the movie doesn't really change that much. You could have just revealed this early on, and the entire movie would have just flowed the same. It doesn't really recontextualize much, other than the fact that the audience has just been misled on this detail. No one really learns anything from it, and just yeah, it's a twist that ultimately doesn't really add much. It's in some ways it comes off of as just, well, this is a Saw movie. We need to have a twist somewhere. But other than that, yeah, not much to say about this one. I kind of like it, but it's an incredibly weak twist. And I think this is or the only other minor twist that we have is just the reveal that so Jill kept a sixth envelope, and the sixth one is of Detective Hoffman, and this is his test that John had for him. But it's really a minor detail. I wouldn't exactly call that A big twist. I don't. Maybe some people will, but yeah, it's again, it's something that it might be an unexpected development, but it doesn't change anything that comes before it in the movie, other than just okay, we saw that Joe got 6 envelopes, but only handed over 5. Um, Speaking of envelopes, there's also a scene where she has a large padded envelope and she puts it through, or she goes to a hospital, puts the envelope through a slot in a door, and we can't really see who is on the door or whose name is on the door. And I looked closely. Actually stood up and walked right in front of the TV, and it's just that actually made it worse. It's incredibly blurry. If you view it from a distance, you can kind of make out the word doctor, but you can't see anything else on. Can't really make out any other text. And also, it's the only door in that entire hallway that has a like a mail slot on it, which is a weird architectural design. But anyway, so that's the twists. This video is already so long. Um, let's move on to the traps. So pulling up the wiki page. We have the opening trap, the pound of flesh trap. And apparently the two people in this trap were Simone and Eddie. I think I briefly caught the names. So these were people who had been accused of giving people loans with outrageous rates, knowing that they wouldn't be able to repay them, and therefore they could just like repossess these people's assets. They're just preying on the weak, and now they will become the prey. What was the exact line? Sorry. Um, yeah, it's yeah. There are shackles on their heads that resemble the shackles they put on others. That's a bit of it's a bit of a stretch. I personally wouldn't really call, giving people bad rates knowing that they're going to get the better end of this deal. That I'm not really considering that a shackle. So the goal of this test is to cut off the most flesh from yourself, which is yeah, this trap is one of those just meaningless ones. There's no real connection. I keep going back to this idea of the connection between the sin of the person in the trap and what the trap actually represents. And I don't know if most people view it this way. That's just how I like to view the series rather than just, ooh, cool gore. I don't know. Am I looking too deep into this? I don't know. But yeah, this is what I get out of the Saw series. And yeah, so you have essentially loan sharks in a way, and they have to cut off pieces of themselves, otherwise, bolts will be screwed into their head. And that just doesn't have anything to do with what they've done in their past. It's just this bit of senseless violence to open the movie with. And yeah, I don't like that. I like my senseless violence to have more depth and meaning to it. That's such a weird thing to say. But it's true. The movie just starts out this way in order to show just a bit of blood and gore at the beginning to get people excited. Yay, violence. Oh, that's right. I had a lemon poppy seed thing this morning. That's what I'm finding in my mouth. Sorry. ADHD. I get distracted. So moving on, we have William's trial. So yeah, he's being led through a zoo. I don't know why they picked a zoo, and the only reason you can really tell that is because of one scene where he's walking through a hallway with a bunch of broken and abandoned terrariums. Yeah, he has explosive straps on his wrists. Underneath some of these straps are actually like some words, um, like the party, which these are the things that trigger the flashbacks to his past with John. It's that part isn't the most meaningful and mostly serves as a reason to be showing us these flashbacks. I don't, just a minor detail. But the bigger thing is that the entire test is designed to put William face to face with the decisions that he has to make to essentially make him confront, okay, is this formula that he's come up with, is this actually any good? Because John doesn't believe that it is. William does believe. So it's this confrontation between two different ideologies, which that's what I really like in this movie. I just find that whole concept very interesting. Although the actual how well it actually works in these traps is a little bit hit and miss. Um, so one thing I forgot to mention with the pound of flesh trap is that it's a little bit odd in that it's directly pitting people against each other. There haven't, I mean, outside of ones where, people aren't supposed to be pitted against each other, such as the entirety of Saw 5 with those traps, or the nerve gas house, where, ideally people shouldn't be turning on each other, and if they didn't, then things would work out a lot better. And yeah, so we have a case in the beginning of, yeah, people directly do have to, they're competing against each other. Only one can make it out of this, and someone's success is directly based on someone else's failure. I think the only other examples I can think of this are, yeah, they're not as direct. We have, and they're actually both in Saw 1. We have the bathroom trap where, okay, Dr. Gordon's goal is to kill Adam, but the difference in this is that this is not Adam's test. This is specifically Dr. Gordon's test. Adam just needs to kind of get out of it. He doesn't have any other ulterior goals in this. We also have the reverse bear trap in the first Saw movie, where Amanda, in order to get the key to save herself, needs to dig that out of the body of someone who's lying on the ground. So obviously that person is not going to live unless Amanda fails at her task. Or actually, no, we have a actually in Saw 4 where the person in the scalping seat was told that, okay, after you were rescued, go kill this police officer. But besides that, most of every other test that I can think of has been a case of, everyone in this has a chance to survive. Everyone can, if if they really work at it, everyone can survive, as opposed to this direct competition. And there's a lot of these competition ones in this movie. I don't know if it's really trying to prove that, that health insurance is kind of seeming like a competition, even though in an ideal world everyone should be able to survive. I don't know. I do dislike that about this movie, just because it's not the principle of it that I dislike. It's just that it's so different from the previous five movies. It's almost like uh, John suddenly had a change of heart or a different series of ideals when coming up with these. It's a little bit odd. So the first trap that William is in is the oxygen crusher, and this is the only one where William is he's directly in the trap rather than being kind of a participant on the side who influences the outcome. He is stuck in this. His life is at risk through this whole experience. So the basic nature of it is that, yeah, so there's two people, and the more these people breathe, the more these clamps on the side of their torso will compress their chest until eventually killing them. So the idea is for both of them to hold their breath, and it's actually very well done. It's a very tense scene. It's just the basic nature of it is tense, and then the way it was shot is tense. So it's a visually speaking, it's a very nicely executed trap. The trick with this one is that, yeah, so we have William Easton, who is probably healthy. You wouldn't expect to have an unhealthy person in charge of insurance, because that seems a little bit hypocritical. And then you have the janitor, who is a smoker and therefore has worse lungs. So I guess this is the first test where John is showing off that, okay, out of these two people, who has the will to live more. But to me, it's just not a fair test. I think putting just a smoker up against a person with really healthy lungs, unless William just completely freaks out and hyperventilates, I don't see any way in which he does not survive this. It doesn't seem like a very fair chance. Um, just as one other thing, I think a lot of so I always I've mentioned this before. I like talking about the connections between the victims in the trap and the sins they've committed. Um, None of these traps really emphasize that. It's more just about the thematic nature of just confronting William's formula. Just okay, how accurate is this versus who really should be allowed to survive in these situations. But yeah, besides that, it's just random things. I mean, in this, you get the little bit of okay that you have the lungs and breathing is important, and how you breathe or how often you breathe is going to, in this specific instance, be the determiner of whether you live or not. And you can kind of see that connection, but that sort of connection completely falls apart in the wayside as we move on to the other traps. Speaking of which, we have up next we have the gallows. So in this, it starts out with an interesting moment where William decides, okay, nope, I'm not going to do this test, and he decides to just straight off walk away, which is something most people don't do. I mean, you can take into effect, I think that, yeah, the biggest example of this is at the end of Saw 5, after Storm is told about this glass box via a tape, and he decides to like kind of stay behind and trap Hoffman. Whereas the other solution that he didn't consider is okay, just take this tape with the unedited voice, walk out of the room because the door is not locked, since Hoffman is able to walk through it very easily shortly after, and just, hey, there's your proof. Go survive, get Hoffman in trouble. But no, he decides to stick around and dies as a result of it. But yeah, if he had just, that was a test that he could have just skipped entirely. I think there were also you could argue some of Riggs' tests in Saw 4 were kind of like that. But yeah, here William decides to do that, and then the shackles on one of his wrists start beeping, indicating that, yeah, sorry, you can't get away from that this easily. And I thought that was a nice little touch. But anyway, in this test, William has to, yeah, outside of him being a participant himself, he has to directly decide which of two people will be more deserving of being let to live. On one hand, you have Alan, who is his William's file clerk. He is someone who has, the perfectly healthy life, but they don't really have anyone in their life. They're going to live and die and disappear, and no one will really care about it. And on the other hand, you have Addie, who is his secretary, has a family history of diabetes, and is not expected to live as long, but does have a family that they would be living not living family that they would be leaving behind. So William has to decide, okay, does he just go by the formula that he came up with, stick with his company's policy, or does he decide, okay, this other person is more worthy of being allowed to survive just because of their situations, just taking into effect these human qualities, which his mathematical formula can't possibly account for. And I really like this concept. It's a very not it's not a nice test. It's gruesome because the loser gets lynched with razor wire. Um, but yeah, it's the basic concept of it is I like it. There's no connection at all between that concept and the actual trap. The nature of this has nothing to do with the razor wire noose. But yeah, besides that, the principle behind this trap is a interesting one. And William decides that okay, here the human element is worth it. That okay, that the person with a family is deemed more worthy of being allowed to survive than the healthy loner, and which means the formula isn't the right thing to do. So yeah, William is beginning to kind of see the error of his ways. So we move on to the third trap, the steam maze. Side note, apparently the steam maze was also used, or according to the wiki, is used in the second Saw video game. I haven't played these video games, and I don't really think I can. And tracking down a secondhand copy is expensive, and it's not on any digital storefronts. Um, but I've watched some of the first one on YouTube. Haven't gotten to the second one yet. But anyway, so we have the Steam maze. So the lawyer for the insurance company is trapped at the bottom of this maze, and William has to be the one to lead her out of it within a minute and a half. Otherwise, a device will go off and will stab her in the brain. Um, this one's a little bit weak. We there is I think the only real, or obviously it's like thematically, Steam and hot vents has nothing to do with anything. Um, but yeah, so William tries to lead this woman out. There are a couple times where he has to make a bit of a sacrifice in order to get this woman through. He can divert the steam from the actual mace itself into himself, which I guess is a way of showing that, he's capable of more compassion. But besides that, doesn't really have anything to do with anything. There's nothing within his life as vice president of an insurance company that means he personally has to make any sacrifices for the people that are covered by the insurance. So thematically, there's just nothing with this trap. I think it's one of the weaker ones, and I don't actually like the end of it where it's revealed that okay, once this woman gets to the end, in order to deactivate the device, she has to get a key that has been sewn into William's abdomen. Um, there's a little bit of nice wording in that saying that the tape says that William has the key to this person's survival, which in this case is quite literal. But it's it just turns the end of this test into just senseless violence, where this woman attacks William and he fights back, and then ultimately she dies because she runs out of time. But I also don't think 90 seconds is a reasonable expectation for someone to navigate through a maze and then do ad hoc surgery using a power tool. I don't really care for this one. Um, Up next, we have the shotgun carousel, which is, yeah, it's an interesting one, but it does have some hit or miss elements to it, which I guess is the nature of guns. Um, so the premise behind this is that on this little child's carousel from a playground is the six members of the dog pit. These are the people whose specific job it is to find all the mistakes and problems with people's insurance that they can, specifically so that they can deny people coverage. These are not nice people. And there's a shotgun, so all six of them are going to die unless William does something. He has the option to save two of them by impaling his hand with a spike. This will raise the shotgun so that two people won't die. So again, it's a bit weird that, yeah, here we again have a trap that not everyone is able to survive. Technically, everyone has an equal chance, but only 1/3 of the people can make it out. So even compared to some of the earlier traps I mentioned, where one person's survival depends on someone else failing, here this one is just in some ways it's an interesting concept. In other ways, it's just a needless bloodbath because we have this one trap that takes the lives of four people, and that's the record in the series so far. In fact, actually, we've never had a single trap that has this many people in it before. Previous record with that was the necktie trap in in Saw 5, unless you count all the people in the nerve gas house, but I like to think of that as more a series of traps rather than a single trap. This is just one entity. Anyway, so yeah, William has to make up this decision of just who's worthy to survive without really able to take into account like his formula. Like he's not given any information about the healthiness of any of these people. He just has to decide who lives and who dies. And we also do get to see a bit of the ugly side of human nature, whereas you see some people who try pleading for your life, and then you see other people who, when finding out about this, are like, oh no, that person's a liar. Here's why. And yeah, so it again, it's this instead of people cooperating, it's people directly competing against each other. Although in this case, it kind of makes sense because if only two people can make it out alive, you're not going to have six people cooperating together because they can't do that. It doesn't make sense. But yeah, you do see this ugly side of human nature again, where people, generally speaking, are out to save themselves. There's a little bit of a dichotomy to this one in that, yeah, you can kind of see both sides of it a little bit. But yeah, in the end, it William is the only one who can decide, and at the by the end of the day, when everything's said and done, um, there's this I won't really call it a nice moment, but there's a good moment where the one person who's left who is just doomed to die is just shouting at William saying like, okay, you know what, your company and your plan, they suck, and also just look at me as I die. And William is just kind of like shrinking away and just completely defeated, backing away towards the door of the room. And then as the shotgun gets aimed at this person, they were so strong, and then just instantly they just fall apart. And it's this really interesting moment where you can really see just the concept of a will to live and whether someone really does have that. This person had this false sense of bravado, and then when it comes time for it, just they're just gone. So yeah, that's an interesting one. And then finally, we have the acid room. And I will say, the interesting picture they chose on the wiki for this one of the sun going like, it's just okay. That's an interesting one that you went with. So yeah, we find out at the end that it is up to this mother and son to decide whether or not William lives. Which, yeah, it's an interesting moment, but in some ways it does. I have mixed feelings on this just because in some ways it does invalidate William's whole test because he's no longer in control of his own destiny. Um, on the other hand, it does tie back kind of like what we had in Saw 3, where people have to decide, okay, can I forgive someone for the mistakes of their past and allow this person to live? And we get this interesting moment where the mother decides that okay, you have to die not because I can't forgive you for what you've done, but because she couldn't forgive herself for what William might do to someone else in the future, which is definitely an interesting take on this. Um, what else? So yeah, but then the woman isn't able to do it, at which point the son just steps up and says, well, I can do it, and condemns William to death. And then you get some effects that are a little bit less than convincing. I'm not entirely sure what a person melting apart from the inside is supposed to look like. Um, but I don't know, this looked very fake to me. And I guess this also, there's one question left up in the air that, um, yeah, what happens to Pamela? I mean, she's in a cage, just essentially as almost as kind of bait, stringing William along. But then when he dies, yeah, what happens to her? Is she just the zipper's uneven? Sorry. Is she just stuck there? And what happens to this woman and her son? Are they just stuck there? We'd never really find out. It's like okay, scenario's done. Now we just have people in cages. I don't know. My throat's getting dry because I've been talking for an hour almost. I don't know how to make these videos short. Oh, how did I ever make a 20-minute video on the original Saw movie? Should I go back and make that one longer? I don't know. I think I'm talking about the plot too much. I'm digressing. So anyway, the last trap that we have is what the wiki lists as Reverse Bear Trap 2.0, where Hoffman is now in the Reverse Bear Trap. And the interesting thing with this is that we see Hoffman, as deranged as he really does have that will to live. We see in a flashback that he says he doesn't need to be tested because he didn't like completely toss away his previous life but John thinks that yeah, he does still need to be tested, and in a way Hoffman does pass his test. He brutally breaks his own hand in order to escape and try to undo the device, and he isn't able to completely do it in time, but we do get this smart moment where he just shoves his head into a door with metal bars in it so that the reverse bear trap can't open the whole way. So that's a bit of a clever moment. He's able to do that. He survives. His cheek is completely torn open, but he does live to fight another day. And as he's screaming in anguish, the movie ends. Just as a side note, or yeah, I guess to wrap things up, I do like this version of the Hello Zep theme, the Zep 6 it's called, just because we get this moment we haven't had in any others where it just ends with like a bunch of really heavy hits set to a montage of doors being slammed shut. Jill gets to say game over in this version. So yeah, I do like that bit of the music. It's kind of cool. On the downside, the montage leading up to all this is just a mess. It is edited very chaotically, and I find it a bit hard to follow, which wasn't a problem I had with the previous five movies in this franchise, at least with regards to the final montage. That being able to follow the rest of four and five is an entirely different matter itself. And we also get, for the first time, and I think the only time in this franchise, we get a post-credit scene, or at least we do in the unrated version. I don't think this was included in the theatrical. I'm not positive. But yeah, we have this little scene where Amanda goes up to Jeff's child from Saw 3 and tells her not to trust the person who rescues her. And yeah, the reason why is because, yeah, don't trust Hoffman. Hoffman is the one who's blackmailing Amanda and essentially going to get her killed. So it's an interesting scene, but I don't think it ultimately really adds anything to the movie. It almost seems like a deleted scene that should have happened like during the earlier flashbacks when we found out about this letter in the first place. Yeah, it doesn't really add much. I think if you watched the theatrical version and didn't get the scene, you're not really missing out on anything. Just like go look up this one scene online. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to stop things here. These videos just keep getting like almost consecutively 10 minutes longer. At this rate, yes, if I keep going at this, the spiral video will be longer than the movie itself. Um, Yes, I think so. Let's see, 7, 9, that'll be half an hour. What's the runtime of Spiral? If it's more than an hour and a half, then that doesn't apply. But if it's around that time, then yeah, the video will be longer than the movie. At that point, I should just sit down and do like a commentary. I should try that for a movie someday. Anyway, I'm getting away from myself. I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to go do some job searching, and then I will watch Saw 7, aka Saw 3D, aka Saw the Final Chapter. There's a lot of titles to this one. And yeah, record my video for thoughts on that one. Hope to see you all then.